They swore an age could not end. Palaces had stood for generations. Ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean bearing copper, tin, wine, and cedar. Scribes inked treaties in clay and gold. And yet, in a handful of decades, that whole world came apart. Cities burned. Kings pleaded for food. Roads fell silent. And somewhere on the horizon, sails appeared. You've heard the legend. A wave of invaders, the sea peoples, descended from nowhere and erased the Bronze Age. But what if this story is only part of the truth? What if the collapse was not a single blow but a chain reaction, a world too interconnected to fail softly? In the next 30 minutes, we'll dismantle the myth, sift the evidence, and follow a trail from palace archives to scorched shorelines. We'll ask, who were the sea peoples really? Why did Ramesses III write of enemies who came from the sea in their islands? And what force was big enough to break a civilization that ran on bronze, bureaucracy, and boats? Our starting point is a paradox. The late Bronze Age wasn't backward. It was globalized. Mycenaean palaces in Greece sent perfumed oils and warrior gear across the sea. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia enforced treaties with iron will and clay tablets. Egypt, the superpower of the south, imported timber from Levantine forests and copper from Cyprus. Ugarit, a port city on the Syrian coast, read and wrote in multiple scripts. Everyone traded with everyone. Everyone depended on everyone. So where do the sea peoples fit? Egyptian inscriptions from the reigns of Merneptah and Ramesses III depict battles against foreign coalitions, men in feathered headdresses, ox-driven carts, women and children in tow, ships clashing in the Nile Delta. The names are a collage: Sheridan, Shekelesh, Luca, Peliset, Tieker, Denyen. They sound dramatic. They are dramatic. But are they the cause or the symptom? Let's rewind to the hinge of history, the decades around 1200 BCE. That's when the Mycenaean palaces, Pylos, Mycenae, Tiryns, suffered destruction. That's when the Hittite capital at Hattusa goes silent. That's when Ugarit's archives end abruptly, with letters still wet from the scribe's stylus when fire claimed the shelves. That's when Egyptian reliefs turn from triumph to siege. And here's our first myth to puncture. The sea peoples did not appear out of a clear blue sea. They moved through a world already shaking. Start with the basics. Bronze. It's the super metal of the age, but it demands a marriage of two distant elements, copper and tin. Copper is abundant in Cyprus, Anatolia, and other regions. Tin is rare, scattered, Central Asia, Anatolia's fringes, the distant west. Bronze requires trade routes. Trade requires stability. Stability requires strong states. In other words, the tech of the age was a chain and every link had to hold. Now look at the climate. Around 1200 BCE, the eastern Mediterranean enters a period of aridity. Pollen samples drop. Lake levels fall. Stalagmites record droughts. Famine wins its way into the archives as kings beg for grain and ships chase barley instead of luxury. In one letter, a desperate ruler pleads, "The enemy ships are already here. My fields are scorched. Send grain." He never got it. Add earthquakes. The Aegean and Anatolian fault lines are lively. Archaeologists talk about earthquake storms, clusters of quakes that topple walls and trigger fires. Ruins read like seismographs, collapsed columns, crushed thresholds, crushed hopes. Was it enough to fell empires? Not alone. But shake a building and watch the cracks widen. Now consider the politics. The Hittite Empire, a powerhouse controlling Anatolia and northern Syria, was already strained. Internal rivals fought for the throne. Vassals chafed. Assyria pressed from the east. In Greece, the Mycenaean palaces, those storied centers of linear bead tablets and boar tusk helmets, were intensely centralized. Palaces managed farmland, metal, and labor. Centralization is efficient until it isn't. When the center fails, there is no fallback. And that's the point. By the late 13th century BCE, the system was brittle. A drought cuts harvests. A quake damages granaries. A rival seizes a border city. The tin shipment is late. What does a hungry warrior do when the palace can't pay him? He looks to the sea. Picture small crews of displaced sailors and fighters. Some are mercenaries who once guarded the very ships they now raid. Some are migrants with families in carts, seeking a new shore. Some are vassals turned enemies, rebranding under new names. They move along the coasts like a storm. In Egyptian records, they appear as a confederation. But a confederation is a moment, not an origin. Their roots are multiple, their motives mixed: hunger, ambition, opportunity. Let's meet a few of the names. The Shurden. The Egyptians depict them with horned helmets and round shields. Some scholars link them to Sardinia, others to corsair groups in the Aegean. The Luca, often associated with southwestern Anatolia, a land of coves and pirates. The Shekelesh, perhaps related to Sicily. The Danaan, an echo of the Danoi, a Homeric term for Achaeans. The Peliset, often identified with the Philistines of the southern Levant. None of these identifications is ironclad. All are plausible. The Sea Peoples, it turns out, are a chorus, not a soloist. Which brings us to Egypt's stage. In the reign of Merneptah, around 1208 BCE, invaders probe the delta. Egypt holds. A stela boasts of victory. But the real theater is the reign of Ramesses III, a century later's echo of Ramesses the Great. Ramesses III fights on land and sea against a coalition of peoples pushing into the Levant, driving south. He claims a decisive win in the Nile mouths, halting a tide of migrants and warriors. The images are vivid. Ships locked, archers raining death, enemy craft capsizing. Ramesses names the enemy and celebrates their defeat. Egypt survives. But step outside the Nile Valley and survival looks different. Ugarit burns. Its last letters speak of enemy ships and pleading for help that never comes. The Hittite capital is abandoned. The empire fragments. The Mycenaean palaces are destroyed or slowly depopulated. The Cypriot towns are hit. The old trade arteries clot. The bronze economy sputters. Scribes go unemployed. Literacy, always a small elite craft, shrinks further. This sounds like the work of conquerors. But look closer. After the flames, who replaces the fallen palaces? In Greece, the next centuries, the so-called Dark Age, see smaller communities, simpler pottery, fewer long-distance luxuries. There's no one imperial stamp. In the southern Levant, new groups appear. Among them, a people whose pottery looks Mycenaean in design but local in clay. They build 5 cities near the coast: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gath. We know them later as the Philistines. Were they the Peliset of Egyptian texts? Many think so. But even there, the picture is not invasion alone. It's blending. Aegean styles mixed with Levantine traditions, a new identity forged on new ground. So did the Sea Peoples cause the collapse? Or did the collapse create the Sea Peoples? Here's a hint from economics. When palaces pay, piracy is risky. When palaces fail, piracy pays. A sailor with a sword and nothing to lose can become a sea person in an afternoon. A famine can turn farmers into migrants. A war can push one tribe into the arms of another. The coalition that Ramesses III fought? It looks like a caravan and a fleet at once. A people on the move, families and fighters entwined. It's not a monolith. It's a migration under pressure. Let's test the theory with timings. The destructions are not a single year of flame. They ripple. Some sites fall earlier, others later. Some are rebuilt, some are not. The pattern suggests waves: quake, famine, revolt, raid, repeat. Each wave weakens the next victim. Each fallen port starves a hinterland. Each lost shipment of tin makes bronze dearer, tools rarer, armies smaller. Listen to a king's voice from Ugarit's ashes. He writes to a great power. Send grain that I might live. The enemy ships have come. My army is in Hatti, my ships are in Lycia. The words shiver with helplessness. This is a system stretched so thin that an enemy can attack when the army is away and the navy is outsourced. He's not just fighting raiders, he's fighting the geometry of dependence, and yet we must be fair to the sea people's blade. They did burn cities, they did topple palaces, they did seize coasts, they did fight Egypt. They were not a mirage invented to excuse failure. They were one vector in a perfect storm. What about iron? Isn't this the Iron Age's birth cry? Yes and no. Iron existed before 1200 BCE, but it was rare and expensive. After the collapse, iron becomes more common, partly because tin is hard to get, partly because local production matters more than elite networks. Iron is tricky to smelt. It demands new skills and new social arrangements, but it democratizes metal over time. No empire controls all the tin. Communities can learn iron with local ore. That's a quiet revolution hiding in the rubble. And what about memory? The Greeks later sing of a war at Troy, heroes in shining bronze, palaces and pride, and a world that ended with a storm of return. The Bible remembers the Philistines with iron weapons and coastal cities. Egyptians carve their victories and list the names of enemies. These memories are not identical to the archaeology, but they rhyme. They remember a time of uprooting, when identities were fluid, and every coast held a story of ships. Let's bring the focus to identity, because this is where the myth becomes human. What is a sea person? Imagine a young man in western Anatolia whose fishing village just lost its market because the Hittite tax office closed. He signs on as a deckhand with a captain who used to ferry copper but now hunts for barley. Imagine a mother from Cyprus whose town burned. She follows her brother to a new shore carrying recipes and gods in her head. Imagine a disgruntled bodyguard from a Mycenaean palace who knows where the warehouses are. Put them together on one ship and give them a name. Denian, Sheridan, Peliset, any and all. They are not an ethnicity so much as a coalition of circumstance. Now, before we answer our opening question, let's weigh the evidence that has seduced historians for centuries. There are inscriptions from Egypt. There are burned layers in cities across the eastern Mediterranean. There are pottery styles that shift like dialects. There are letters from Ugarit and Hatti that read like the last text message sent before the phone dies. There are climate records that whisper of drought. There are fault lines that crack walls. There are skeletons in hurried graves. Each piece alone is suggestive. Together they form a pattern, systemic fragility meeting cascading shocks with mobile groups, the sea peoples exploiting, surviving, and accelerating the fall. So did the sea peoples actually end the Bronze Age? The honest answer is sharper than a slogan. No single storm ends a climate. It's the weather pattern that changes. The sea peoples were a storm front within a wider shift, a world whose centralized hubs could not absorb bad years, bad rulers, bad harvests, bad luck all at once. The proof lies in what comes next. After the collapse, solutions are local, small polities knit together by new practices. Iron tools spread, writing re-emerges in leaner forms. The Phoenicians turned seafaring into an art and carry the alphabet to distant shores. In Greece, oral poetry preserves a memory of heroes, and centuries later a new alphabet arrives and city-states are born. In the Levant, the Philistine cities flourish, trade, and then fade into the region's mosaic. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, new empires rise, Neo-Assyrians, Neo-Babylonians. Egypt survives, but smaller, poorer, older. The world didn't end. It changed shape. We end where we began, on a deck staring at a horizon of risk. Interconnection is power, interconnection is peril. The late Bronze Age was brilliant because it linked mountains to seas, palaces to ports. It fell because those links became brittle. The sea peoples are the face we give to that brittleness when it breaks. Now ask yourself, what does a collapse look like from inside? Not a headline, but 1,000 small failures, a ship late, a field dry, a door unguarded, a promise broken. And who thrives? Those who can move, adapt, and find a new shore. That's the lesson that echoes across 30 centuries. The collapse of the Bronze Age wasn't a morality play of barbarians versus civilization. It was a stress test. The ones who wrote the old rules couldn't change them fast enough. The ones who had no rules made new ones. So did the Sea Peoples end the Bronze Age. They ended the illusion that the sea was only a highway of goods. They showed it could also carry hungry families, sharp swords, and new beginnings. The Bronze Age ended because the world that built it could no longer carry its own weight. The Sea Peoples were the wave that made the cracks visible. If you stayed with me through the fires, the famines, and the fleets, here's the thought I want to leave with you. Our world, like theirs, is a network. It is powerful. It is fragile. And sometimes the thing we fear at the horizon is not an invader. It is a mirror. Coming up in a future episode, how a city of traders took those broken networks and re-wove them into something new. The Phoenicians and the birth of the alphabetic world.